5:29 a.m. Gulf of Oman, 34 nautical miles southeast of the Strait of Hormuz. An Iranian speedboat just raked USS Sirocco with automatic weapons fire. 12 rounds from a PKM machine gun, 7.62 millimeters medium caliber, impacted the patrol craft's superstructure across a 4-foot section of the bridge wing frame at 5:29 a.m., punching through the aluminum cladding and sending fragments into the bridge interior. Ensign Carlos Reyes, standing watch on the port bridge wing, was hit by 2 fragments from the shattered cladding. Both fragments were sub-centimeter in size. Both drew blood. Neither was life-threatening. Reyes did not leave the bridge wing. He stood his watch. What he was watching was a formation of 7 Iranian IRGCN speedboats, fast, shallow draft assault craft operating at speeds between 45 and 55 knots, that had been closing on USS Sirocco for 4 minutes and 12 seconds before the trigger was pulled. The Sirocco is a Cyclone-class patrol ship, 179 feet, 340 tons, crew of 31, operating in the Gulf of Oman as part of a combined maritime forces patrol designed to maintain freedom of navigation in the approach waters east of the strait. 31 sailors, 7 speedboats, 4 minutes of closing time before someone opened fire, and a commanding officer who was about to make a maneuver that her ship was not designed to survive, and that saved everyone aboard. Welcome to Navy Combat USA. This is the morning American and Iranian forces exchanged fire in the Gulf of Oman, and the emergency maneuver that prevented a 340-ton patrol ship from being overwhelmed in open water. The Gulf of Oman approaches to the Strait of Hormuz represent a different operational environment than the strait itself. The strait is confined, heavily monitored, and politically visible enough that both sides exercise restraint in their actions there. A significant incident in the strait affects global shipping immediately and generates international attention within hours. The Gulf of Oman is less visible. It is open water. It is less photographed by commercial satellite passes. The diplomatic attention it receives is proportionally less than the strait, which means the political cost of Iranian action there is lower. IRGCN doctrine accounts for this. Multiple Fifth Fleet planning assessments had noted that the Gulf of Oman approach zone, the 100-mile corridor between the open ocean and the strait entrance, represented an area where IRGCN harassment operations could be conducted at greater intensity and with greater ambiguity than inside the strait. The assessments recommended enhanced patrol presence. The presence was enhanced. USS Sirocco was one of 3 patrol vessels rotating through the Gulf of Oman patrol zone on the morning of the incident. The other 2, USS Cyclone and USS Tempest, were operating 22 and 37 nautical miles away, respectively. Close enough for communications, not close enough to provide immediate surface support. The nearest air asset was a P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft from VP-9, the Golden Eagles, operating on a surveillance track 80 nautical miles to the south. The nearest fast-mover combat aircraft was a pair of FA-18Cs at NAS Bahrain, 91 nautical miles from the Sirocco's position. At maximum speed, 17 minutes. The 7 Iranian speedboats had been detected at 5:25 a.m. by the Sirocco's bridge team visually, not by radar, which had intermittently struggled with sea clutter in the low swell conditions that morning, as a cluster of contacts moving southeast from the direction of the Iranian coast at extremely high speed. The contacts were initially assessed as civilian craft by the watchstander who first spotted them, Petty Officer 3rd Class Anastasia Kovac, based on their size and profile, small, fast, low profile. A lot of boats like that move through the Gulf of Oman in the early morning hours. Kovac logged the contacts, assigned them a track number, and kept watching. At 5:26 a.m., she noted that the contacts had not adjusted course in response to the Sirocco's position. They were not passing behind the patrol ship. They were not crossing ahead of it. They were tracking directly toward it. She called the officer of the deck. Lieutenant Junior Grade Michael Park arrived on the bridge, looked at the 7 contacts closing at 50 knots from 4 nautical miles, and recognized what he was looking at in approximately 3 seconds. He called the captain. Commanding Officer Lieutenant Commander Angela Torres was in her C cabin. She was on the bridge in 68 seconds. By the time she arrived, the contacts were at 2.1 nautical miles and closing. 4 minutes had elapsed since Kovac first spotted them. The 7 speedboats had used 4 of those minutes to cover most of the distance while the Sirocco's crew moved through the recognition and response cycle. At 2.1 nautical miles, there was not enough distance for the patrol ship to build enough speed to outrun a formation doing 50 knots. The Sirocco's maximum speed is 35 knots. Torres looked at the display. She looked at the 7 contacts. She looked at the distance and the closing speed. She ordered general quarters. Gear. The GQ alarm had been sounding for 41 seconds when the lead speedboat opened fire at 5:29 a.m. The range at the time of the first shots was approximately 900 meters. At 900 meters, a PKM machine gun is accurate and lethal against an unarmored vessel. The rounds that hit the bridge wing cladding and put fragments into Ensign Reyes had been aimed at the bridge, the obvious command and control target on a small patrol ship. Reyes was hit and stayed at his post. The Sirocco's crew response was immediate. The bow-mounted 25mm Mark 38 Bushmaster cannon was manned within 14 seconds of the GQ alarm. Rapid even by training standards, a fact that the subsequent after-action review attributed to the crew's elevated alertness from the visual detection 4 minutes earlier. The 2.50 caliber machine guns on the main deck were manned simultaneously. The lead speedboat was at 700 meters and still closing. Torres made her decision. She did not fire first, she maneuvered. Yes, the maneuver Torres ordered at 5:29 a.m. and 22 seconds, 13 seconds after the Iranian machine gun fire hit her superstructure, was not in any tactical manual she had been trained on. A Cyclone-class patrol ship turning hard to present its stern to an incoming formation of 7 speedboats while simultaneously accelerating to maximum speed was not doctrine. Doctrine said hold course. Engage with available weapons, call for support. Torres did not hold course. She put the helm over hard to starboard, a 120-degree turn that pointed the Sirocco's stern directly at the lead speedboat, and ordered all ahead flank. The physics of the maneuver were specific and deliberate. By presenting the stern to the lead speedboat, she removed the Sirocco's broadside from the Iranian gunner's aim. A 179-foot ship presents a very different target profile at 0 degrees. A small, narrow stern, then at 90 degrees, which offers 179 feet of length to shoot at. The Bushmaster on the bow was now pointed directly behind the ship, at the Iranian formation, as the Sirocco accelerated away. The machine gun on the lead speedboat fired again at 5:29 a.m. and 35 seconds. The rounds passed to port of the Sirocco's stern, missing by approximately 20 meters as the patrol ship completed its turn. 20 meters. Torres ordered the Bushmaster to engage. The Mark 38 cannon fired its first burst at 5:29 a.m. and 44 seconds, range 650 meters, bearing directly astern. The 25mm rounds hit the water short of the lead speedboat on the first burst. The gun crew was compensating for the ship's own speed and the target's speed simultaneously, a ballistic calculation that requires adjustment shots. The second burst, 3 seconds later, was closer. The lead speedboat turned sharply to the north. It did not slow, but it turned. The turn was not a break-off. It was a reposition. The remaining 6 speedboats were still closing from different angles. Torres called 5th Fleet at 5:30 a.m. The transmission was direct and brief. 5th Fleet, Sirocco. We are under fire. Gulf of Oman. Position follows. 7 fast attack craft, weapons engaged. Requesting immediate air support. At 5th Fleet, the overnight duty watch was transitioning to the morning shift. The flash transmission from Sirocco landed in the crossover window. A moment when both the outgoing and incoming watch officers were at the desk, and the incoming officer had not yet fully assumed the watch. The transmission was received, it was read, it was responded to. But the response, the scramble order for the FA-18Cs at NAS Bahrain, was delayed by 4 minutes and 17 seconds while the watch handover was completed and the incoming officer confirmed authorization to scramble. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. In those 4 minutes and 17 seconds, the Sirocco's crew fought 7 speedboats with a 25mm autocannon and 2.50 caliber machine guns in the open Gulf of Oman. The engagement that followed the scramble delay is documented in the Sirocco's weapons employment log and corroborated by the P-8A Poseidon that diverted from its surveillance track and arrived overhead at 5:38 a.m., 9 minutes after the first shot. The Bushmaster fired a total of 340 rounds in 8 separate bursts across a 6-minute engagement. The 2.50 caliber mounts fired a combined 1,140 rounds. The Iranian speedboats made 3 separate attack runs on the Sirocco during the 6-minute engagement. On each run, the Bushmaster's fire drove the lead boats to alter course before they could close to ramming range. The closest any speedboat got to the Sirocco was 210 meters. A single boat that broke left instead of right on the second attack run, momentarily placing it outside the Bushmaster's arc of fire before the ship's turn brought the cannon back on target. At 210 meters, the .50 caliber mount on the port side engaged it directly. The speedboat turned away at 180 meters. 3 speedboats sustained visible damage from American fire. The damage was assessed from the P-8A's imagery as superficial to moderate, hit, slowed, not sunk. 2 showed reduced speed on subsequent passes. None were destroyed. None of the sailors aboard the Sirocco were killed. Ensign Reyes's 2 fragment wounds were the only American casualties. The F/A-18Cs arrived overhead at 5:46 a.m., 17 minutes after the first Iranian shot. They descended to 1,500 feet and established an orbit over the Sirocco's position. The 7 speedboats were already breaking contact when the Hornets arrived. Not because the fighters had done anything to them, because the P-8A, which had been overhead for 8 minutes by then, had been broadcasting the fighters' launch and ETA on the maritime emergency frequency. The Iranians heard the broadcast. They did not wait for the Hornets to arrive. By 5:48 a.m., all 7 speedboats had turned northwest and were moving at high speed toward the Iranian coast. The FA-18Cs orbited for 47 minutes. They made several low passes over the retreating contacts, visible, loud, impossible to ignore. Then they returned to Bahrain. The Sirocco continued its patrol. The after-action review of the Sirocco incident produced findings that were directionally similar to those from previous IRGCN encounter reviews, but with specific new elements. The first finding was the visual-only detection gap. The radar's sea clutter performance had been degraded by the morning swell conditions, and the contacts had been detected visually at 4 nautical miles rather than by radar at a longer range. The 4-minute gap between visual detection and weapons fire, the window during which the Sirocco's crew had moved through recognition, assessment, and response, was assessed as within normal parameters, but at the tight end. The review recommended a more aggressive early escalation of contact threat levels when radar performance was degraded. The second finding was the watch transition delay. The 4-minute, 17-second delay in scrambling the F/A-18Cs during the watch handover at 5th Fleet was assessed as a significant procedural failure. The review recommended a protocol requiring incoming watch officers to assume full authorization authority simultaneously with arrival at the watch station, removing the handover transition as a factor in time-critical response decisions. The third finding was specific to Torres's maneuver. The stern presentation turn, presenting the narrowest profile to incoming fire while maintaining the primary weapon in bearing, was identified as tactically effective in the specific geometry of the attack. The review characterized it as an improvised tactic demonstrating exceptional situational awareness. It also noted that the maneuver had placed the Sirocco in a position where a speedboat attack from astern, the ship's weakest defensive angle, could have been lethal if any of the Iranian craft had continued straight through rather than turning. None of them had. Whether because the Bushmaster fire was accurate enough to discourage it, or because the Iranian boat's mission was harassment rather than destruction, or because the individual crews made their own survival calculations when 25mm rounds started hitting the water close to their hulls. The review could not determine which factor was decisive. What it could determine was that the margin had been real. The exchange of fire between USS Sirocco and 7 IRGCN speedboats in the Gulf of Oman at 5:29 a.m. was the first time American and Iranian naval forces had exchanged weapons fire since an incident in 1988 that most people in the Gulf had spent 30 years hoping would not be repeated. The institutional memory of what happened in 1988, the tanker war, Operation Praying Mantis, the shoot-down of Iran Air Flight 655, sat in the background of every American and Iranian naval commander operating in the Gulf region. Nobody wanted a repeat. The Sirocco incident did not become a repeat. Ensign Reyes kept his watch. The Bushmaster kept firing. The speedboats kept coming and kept breaking off. The P-8 arrived and broadcast the fighters' ETA. The fighters arrived 17 minutes too late to matter and left an hour later. Everyone went home, but the 7 speedboats that had attacked in the Gulf of Oman had done so with the apparent knowledge that the nearest American air support was 17 minutes away. They had attacked, sustained the attack through 6 minutes of return fire, and broken off in time to clear the area before the fighters arrived. The timing was not coincidental. The IRGCN had studied the response time from NAS Bahrain to the Gulf of Oman patrol zone. It knew the window. It had operated inside that window, conducted an attack, collected whatever intelligence the attack provided about the Sirocco's defensive systems and response patterns, and departed before consequences arrived. 17 minutes. That is the number the IRGCN carried back from the Gulf of Oman that morning. Every future operation in that corridor will be planned around it. Stay vigilant. Stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.